everybody, welcome to Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. I don't know about you, but I am so super stoked today. My name is Angel, and today, if you've asked why I'm pretty excited, today is the last day of the Rag Quilt Series. So we've gone through and we've figured out our supplies, we've gotten our fabric. Last week you actually made your sandwiches, and I'm sure in between you've had some lunch, but we made quilting sandwiches, and we've also sewn our X's. So what is the next step? What do we do now? Well, today I'm going to take you through the steps, and we're going to figure out exactly how it is that we're going to get this done and turn it into a beautiful, fun, finished project. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about just a little bit about design. I'm thinking I'm going to do a recap and talk about this a little bit more intense on my Facebook Live that'll happen tonight. But in the meantime, I'll give you a real quick synopsis of one of the ideas that you can do to get this design in place and help your sewing become a lot more manageable. So I'll see you in a second. Okay. So this was a little difficult because of the angle. But what I wanted to show you is one of the ideas that you can do. Whatever it is that we end up doing, it's important to understand what design that you're going to use. So I have pretended as if I had 6 squares across, and it doesn't matter how many down. You want to lay out what you think that your quilt top would look good. And I don't know about you, but I do not enjoy getting on the floor. That is not one of the ways that I enjoy any part of quilting. Now, if I have to, I will. But I'm actually thinking in this situation, it might be really good to lay it out maybe on a dining room table, maybe on your bed. A lot of people like to use the bed. But basically what you're doing is you're just laying out your entire quilt. And once you've figured out the design of your quilt and how you think things look appealing to your eye, then you're solidified, and what you want to start doing is picking up one square on top of the other in the order. Okay? First row. Do it again. Pick it on up, one on top of the other. Second row. Now if you notice, and I'm not sure how this is translating on the video, but I actually picked up left to right as if I'm reading. Okay, the far left was my top, so the far left is this one. The far bottom, the far bottom, yeah. The bottom one is the far right, and it's here. But this is row 1 and this is row 2. And this is how I'm going to keep them. And sometimes I even make a little piece of paper and I take a pen and I write on the paper 1 and I write on the paper 2. And I take that pen and I pin it to the top. That way I don't get confused which row is which as I'm sewing along. Because it's very important that in some form or fashion you keep this organized, especially when you laid it out and you're looking to see that you finish with what you designed. Okay, so this is one method. So once you get them all together, now we got to start sewing them. I love sewing. I hope you do too. So I'm going to take you in and I'm going to bring you into my sewing machine because I'd like to give you a couple of ways to sew these rows together. One row, we got to sew the one row and then the second row and then the third row. However many rows you have, we have to sew those together. So I'm going to take you into the sewing machine and I'm going to talk about this. And I'm going to allow you to see some of these, of my sewing of those rows together. So you have a better idea. See you in a bit. Okay, I wanted to stop before I bring you in closer to my machine, and I wanted to show you that I actually have marked these first row and second row, and of course, 3, 4, 5, however many rows you have, you want to mark every one of them so you keep them straight, because you want to keep that design that you created. Another idea to do with that is once you have laid it out and you've decided on that is the design that you want it to finish as, take a picture. And you can always revert back to the picture. Now I'm going to talk on Facebook Live this evening about another method, which is the one I'm actually using. But I wanted to show you what this entails. Okay, so now we're going to start sewing these things together. And I'm going to bring you in now closer to my machine. Okay, so here we are sitting at my sewing machine. And as you can see, I have my first row labeled. And I'll grab my second. This is my second row. It's on top of another pile. And I actually started to sew, but I can talk about this a little bit. First and foremost, we're now sewing a 1/2 inch seam. It's very important that you have your machine up to sew a 1/2 inch seam. Now I use a seam gauge and a seam guide. So I did my seam gauge, I lined it up, attached my seam guide, and got that 1/2 inch ready to go. I've actually sewn the first 2 blocks of row 1 together. This is actually block number 1. Okay, this is block number 2. So what I'm doing is I'm sewing 2 blocks together throughout the row, and then I'm going to add those together. This is one method. In the second row, when I go to start that, I'm going to show you a different method. 1 and 2 of row 1 are sewn together. Underneath my needle is 3 and 4. The next ones are 5 and 6. And if you notice, my color has to be on the left side. So I want the color one to be on top, okay? So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So the odd numbers on top. And I'm going to line my blocks up, making them nice and pretty, okay? And ready to sew. At this point, I'm going to put them underneath my needle so that when my needle starts, it's going to be hitting on the fabric. 1/2 inch seam. So here we go. And I forgot to backstitch. Gotta love that. I'm not even going to do it. Normally you want to backstitch. I'm not used to backstitching. When I traditionally quilt, I don't do a lot of backstitching. But with a rag quilt, I really do like to backstitch because we're going to be messing with those seams that are actually external. They're on the outside. So I really like backstitching. Every great now and again I forget. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. But I did backstitch here at the end. Okay. So that was blocks 5 and 6 of the first row. Now we're doing 7, 8. Again, 7 will be on the top. 8 will be on the back. Okay, now, important. My fabric has a direction that I like it to sit. If you had 2 fabrics that have to go in a certain direction, you want to make sure they're both facing up or they're both facing in the same direction when you go to sew. Okay, so I'm going to lay this down, 7 and 8, get it lined up, go ahead and start. I'm going to backstitch a little bit, lock those seams, and I'm going to finish it off. Now notice I'm not going very fast. I can go faster, but I just wanted this to be right. I'm going to do a little back stitch. Come to the end. Now blocks 9 and 10. Well, again, that's my backing fabric, so I need to make sure I flip it. That's block 9. This is block 10. This one, it's just about preference. It could go any direction, but I like that XOXO being really bold. So I'm actually going to make it go this direction. Okay. And now if the second one, if block 9 had direction, you need to pay attention and make sure that they're both facing the same direction. Line it up. Get it started. Do a little back stitch. And then go ahead and finish her off. So we have sewn 1 and 2 together, 3 and 4 together, 5 and 6 together, 7 and 8 together, and 9 and 10 together. So now what we want to do is we want to take blocks 1 and 2 and we want to sew them together with 3 and 4. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and pull you out because it's a lot better for you to see all of this at a different angle. You don't need to see me sewing anymore. So I'm going to pull you out and we're going to finish the first row together, and then I'm going to show you another method to sew your rows together. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, I think I started with the more difficult method, but bear with me. So we have sewn blocks 1 and 2 together, blocks 3 and 4 together, blocks 5 and 6 together, blocks 7 and 8 together, and block 9 and 10 together. Now we got to start sewing those all together. So 1 and 2, and if you notice on my pattern, my odd number, so block 1 is odd, it's a solid. My even number is a print. Here's my block 3 and 4. Block 3 is a solid. Block 4 is a print. So I want to take blocks 2 and 3 and sew them together. And I'm going to keep the even number now on top, okay? So block 2 is on top of block 3. My backings are together. That's what's going to give us our seams that are on the outside, okay? So I'm lining up block 2 on top of block 3. And I'm simply going to put them underneath my needle so that when I start sewing, it's ready to go. Again, still a 1/2 inch seam. The rest of this time, we're doing a 1/2 inch seam. Do a couple of stitches. Do a couple of back stitches. Finish it off. Now, typically, I work on 2 rows at a time because I'm all about efficiency, but I think that would confuse people. So right now I'm just going to use my friendly spider because it just makes life easier to get things started. And I'm going to cut it off. All right. I'm not going to move these out of order. So here is, and you could always refer to your picture, but here is 5 and 6. Remember, my odd is a solid right now, so this is 5. I'm going to attach it to 4. I'm going to line them up, set them underneath my needle, so that when it starts stitching, it starts on the block. Block 4 is on the top. My backings are on the bottom, or inside each other. My backings are meeting. I have 4 on the top, 5 underneath with the backing up. So now we're sewing blocks 4 to 5 and 6. Get to the end, do a little back stitch, take off the spider because it's saving me a headache. It's just my method. You could cut it at this point. All right, so now, oh man, I got a lot of quilting bling. Okay, so now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all together. So now I'm going to attach 7 and 8. So 6 is on the top, 7 is on the bottom, backings are together. Make sure they're nice and straight and pretty. You can line up those X lines if you like. Do a little stitching, do a little back stitching, finish it off. We have one more to go. Do a little back stitching at the end. Clip that spider. You could have more than one spider if you like. I don't typically sew like this, so this is the method I'm using. Go ahead and clip it. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 together. I'm going to attach 9 and 10. Remember, my 9 is on the left, 10 is on the right. I'm going to put those together. That'd be 8 and 9 is going together. Because remember, I have 10 blocks per row. So we're going to finish sewing this off. And then I'm going to show you one more method that is a lot easier, but a little more time consuming. Get down to the end here. And this row is finished. So we're going to start row 2. And this one I'm going to make it a little easier. This is row 2. And to be honest with you, on my pattern, the print is on the top. It's the first one, okay? So one this time is a print. So I'm going to sew blocks 1 and 2 together. Do a little back stitch. Get that row finished. And this one I won't take you all the way through because it's very self-explanatory. Let me get my spider out here. Go ahead and clip her off. Remove her from the first row. This is row 1. Row 1 is done. Okay, so this time is row 2, and I have 1 block and 2 blocks together. All I'm going to simply do is add 1 block at a time. So my next block is a print. So I just want to make sure that I'm getting it the way that I want it. So I actually want it this way. So I'm going to line up blocks 2 and 3. Get it lined up, start stitching, back stitch a little bit, finish it off. What do we do at the end? That's right, we back stitch. And like I said, I don't do this in traditional piecing. I don't backstitch a whole lot. It just depends. But in rag quilting, I do a lot of backstitching because the seams are exposed and I think it's really important. Got my spider. Clip off 1, 2, and 3, and guess what? I'm now going to add block 4 to 1, 2, and 3. So all you got to do is just, on this method, every row, you're going to sit here and just keep adding a block every time. In my mind, this takes a little longer. And typically, like I said, I don't use spiders like this as much. I usually work on 2 rows at a time. But that requires a lot of organization. And I just don't want to confuse you too much. I think, I've already given you 2 methods to sew your blocks together. Pick which one makes the most sense to you. Just making sure that, if you took a picture of your pattern, you can always refer to it to make sure that you are getting the right pattern introduced. Because like I told you all before, I've got print, I've got solid, I've got print, I've got solid, and then I've got print again. Watching the direction, putting the back sides together. I am now sewing 4 and 5 together, and I'm just going to keep on doing this over and over and over until all my rows, oh, I forgot to backstitch again, until all my rows are actually sewn together. And then we go to the next step. So go get your rows sewn together. You can hit pause or you can finish watching to get an idea of what's coming up. But I am going to go off camera and get all my rows. I have 11 rows. So I'm going to get all my rows sewn together and I'll see you for the next part. So see you in a second. Okay, so now we've sewn our individual rows together. So now we're ready for the next step. I'm going to highly encourage you to take all of your rows that are sewn together, or individually sewn together. Take all those rows and put them out on whatever you did the first to figure out your design when you laid out those squares. Wherever it was, your bed, your table, your floor, your design wall, whatever place that you laid out all those individual squares, take your strips at this point before everything's sewn together, these individual strips, lay it all out and make sure that you don't have any mistakes. Because once we start adding our rows and getting all this together, it can be a real booger to actually rip those seams out. I mean, these are some pretty long seams. So it's just to help you, catch those errors before you got more work ahead of you, because you could have looked at it beforehand. So I encourage that. If you also notice, I left the paper on each first block of every row. Now, as soon as I started sewing that row and I put that piece of paper pinned, I just left it there. Finished the row, went to the next, did the same thing, and I just left the paper. Every time I sewed the individual row, I just left the paper. And what's that now doing is I have all my rows. I have 11, right? It's helping me keep track of which row is which. So it's very easy for me to know how to lay them out and how to sew them together. Speaking of sewing, so now we're going to our next step. So we're gonna start sewing our rows to each other, okay? So what I want you to understand, a couple of things about this. I am actually going to sew 1 and 2 together, and then I'm going to sew 3 and 4 together, and then I'm going to sew 5 and 6 together, etc., etc. And then eventually start adding those. It's just the method that I use. I can use the starter ender within itself that way, It just makes things faster and easier. However, some people like to sew 1 and 2 together, cut their thread, sew, add on 3, cut their thread, add on 4, cut their, or use a spider in between, it doesn't matter. But they like to just add the 1 row at a time. And that keeps it very organized because you'll know exactly which one is next, right? So there's that. And when you do this, you want to be careful on which side you're sewing, okay? Like when you go to sew your first 2 rows together, you want to make sure that you're doing the bottom of 2 and, I'm sorry, the bottom of the first row and the top of the second, okay? So when you flip this to sew them, you want to know which side. If you accidentally sew the wrong side, what'll happen is your rows will become reversed, okay? So you want to be very careful. Now, I will pin, and I will show you in a picture how I pin those right here. But you're going to want to nest your seams, okay? And it's, if you've never nested seams, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can check out the video titled Beginner Techniques, and I bring up some close-up pictures of it. But you want to nest the seam, and I highly suggest that you open the seam. There is literally 6 layers in when you're adding the 2 blocks together, and then add the seams, and you're going to be sewing 12 layers. So by opening this up, it's distributing the bulk a little differently, and it actually helps make the sewing a little easier. The only other issue with that is that you have to be careful of underneath when you come up to that seam, that this first one doesn't flip. And I have an example of that I'll show you in just a second. So you want to be very careful, but I do suggest that you open your seams to help distribute that bulk a little differently, okay? All right, so let me show you what happens when you don't pay attention. I've left it for now for show and tell, but that's what happens, okay? So I got to figure out if I'm going to rip this part of the seam and re-sew it. I mean, I got one here too. That's what happens when you don't pay attention, okay? So I got to fix that one. Last but not least, before you get started on sewing these wonderful rows together, and then we will tackle the last couple of steps of our rag quilt. I will bring you in as promised on my rows 3 and 4. When I go to sew these 2 rows together, I will show you my general pressing foot, leveling foot. Like I said, a lot of people have these and they don't really know how to make it work. Or actually, I didn't even know what it was for a long time. I learned it later after I've been using it for a long time, because it is my general pressing foot. So I'll bring you in close up to my machine and that foot, and I'll show you how that works. And I will tell you, it does work, and it works well. I think I'm just still going to use my walking foot because it's just what I'm more comfortable with. But I got to tell you, it works really well. I was very impressed. So I will bring you in when I'm on rows 3 and 4, and I'll take you in close up so you can see that. In the meantime, happy sewing those rows together, and we'll get back with that. And then after that, we just have a couple more steps, and it'll be done. It'll be done. So I'll see you in a bit. Okay, as promised, I'm going to show you how to use a leveling foot, and I will tell you it works really, really well with these large, bulky seams. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and sew just like you normally would. Now remember, when you get close to the seam, you want to flip it over, and you want to make sure that this one underneath stays flat and doesn't flip. Okay? That's where Jack is actually your friend. So we're going to sew along, and once you hit that seam, you want to stop. Now as you can see, I'm throwing a picture up right now. you can see exactly how angled that is. So that's a lot of work for the machine to get up that heel, and it might even have a lot of trouble doing it without any feed dogs on that foot. So at this point, and I want to just mention that it is important that you do get your needle onto that seam first, because you want to hold it right where it's at, and that helps with that process, because you're going to lift the presser foot. You're going to put a little pressure on the front here, and then this button over here, there's a slot that it goes into, so you want to push that button in and then lower your presser foot, and as you can see, it's very leveled out, because there's another picture for you. At this point, you want to go ahead and stitch. Don't forget to pull out that pin. Go to the next one. Pull out that next pin before you hit it, and normally you'll see that pin popped out because now we're on the down side of that bulk, and it'll do that every single time. Then you just again want to sew to the next one. And don't forget to check that underneath to make sure it doesn't flip. Got a little bulk here. All right. And you want to stop when it reaches that seam line. You're going to push down, lift your foot, push the button in, lower your foot, sew a stitch or two before you hit that pin. Pull that pin out, sew a couple more stitches, pull the next pin out, and finish it off. Oh, did you hear it click? Now, when you get to the end of your row, don't forget to backstitch. And that is how you use the leveling foot. So if you have one of those and you don't have a walking foot, I highly recommend. Okay, so now you've got all of your rows sewn together. So now you've earned the next step. But before you do that, go ahead and remove all those papers to tell you what row is which. If you've been following along and did this, because you don't need them anymore, it's done. Woohoo! Your quilt is a quilt. But, like I said, you've earned the next step. What is the next step? Take a ride on that victory lap. Woohoo! The victory lap. Basically, a victory lap is where you will take your quilt and we'll pick a spot to start on, and you're going to sew that 1/2 inch seam all the way around the quilt and finish exactly where you started. And remember to keep those seams open, just like you did throughout the rest of the quilt. The bonus is you only have the one layer, right? So go ahead and put the back side down while you're sewing so you can pay attention to those seams and make sure those top seams, they don't flip. And it's so much easier than doing the rest of these. So you'll love this. Take that victory lap and cheer yourself on because you've earned it. After the victory lap, and after you get that done, the next step, there's 2 more steps to make this rag quilt a rag quilt. I'm going to throw a picture up here because you're going to want to take your quilt and you want to sit down somewhere that you're nice and comfortable. Get your scissors or your snips, and you're going to start to snip every seam. And you're going to want to do this about 1/2 inch apart on every one of them. And like I said, I'll put a picture up. And what you also want to pay attention to is that you're not snipping the seam, okay? Try not to get too close to those seams. And you want to go through and do this with every single seam, including the one on the outside, okay? After that's done, what really gives your rag quilt the raggy look is when you start to wash it. Now, I recommend that you use a cold water setting and delicate, okay? You want to throw it in there, and every time you wash it and dry it, so go ahead and dry your quilt after it's washed, that's what really starts to give that seams those raggy look, right? So one of the things that people have talked about, when you wash your rag quilt. A lot of lint will come off, strands of thread from the different fabrics, and they get into your machine or into your dryer, and it causes a little backup sometimes. You get a lot in there. So a lot of people will put their rag quilt in a laundry bag. I don't own a laundry bag. I've never done it that way, but I will tell you there is a lot of lint that comes off of this. But you want to wash it, get that rag started, dry it, and start to enjoy it. And every time you wash your quilt, every time, you will see it become better and better and better. You gotta love that. Using the quilt to its fullest and washing it makes it better. So, congratulations. Once you get through these next steps, you will be with your rag quilt. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Again, there is a freebie on your rag quilt calculator. The link is in the description. It's basically a calculator to help you figure out exactly how much fabric to purchase for your rag quilt project. You can grab that for free. Click the link, supply your name and your email, and I'll send it to your inbox for you. If you've liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Yay. And I don't know about you, but after all of this, this was a big project, and I've got a lot of stuff that has come off. My needle's been used through this whole entire thing, so it's time for a little maintenance. So next week, I'm going to show you how to do some easy maintenance on your domestic machine. Get that needle changed. And so we will tackle that next week. And then tonight on Facebook Live, I will be there for any questions that you may have. You can also pop questions below on this in the comment of this video. You can also send us an email at stoffer@haloinspired.com, and I will be sure to get back to you on any questions you have. But I'd love to see you tonight on Facebook Live, and I'm going to share my finished project. So that tells me I got to get snipping, because I got to get it snipped and ready and thrown in the wash and dried so I have it ready for tonight. So until next time, may you continue to be inspired, productive, and joyful, and never stop making those dreams in quilting come true. Happy quilting. Take that victory lap. You've earned it. See y'all next week.